Siddhi Hum O Nga Hum Benzakur Pema Siddhi Hum. Welcome, everyone. Namaskar. Welcome to my weekly Dharma talk. Those of you who did not attend last week, I'll just make a brief announcement that I am now doing a series of talks on the Suttas of the Digha Nikaya, which is the first and longest section of the Pitaka. It's the second part of the Pali Canon. There are 34 suttas in the Digha Nikaya, and last week we discussed an introduction. I introduced the Pali Canon, and we discussed the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya. Today we're going to be talking about the second sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the Samannaphala Sutta. This talk will not be as long as last week's. Last week we actually went on for about an hour and 3/4. Today I found about 40 minutes worth of material to talk about in the second sutta. So that may be a relief to some of you that we won't be going on quite as long. Of course, we'll have a discussion afterwards. And also, if during the course of the talk you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions as they arise in your mind, rather than waiting till the end of the talk, so that whatever you're asking about is fresh in everyone's mind. So I'm Tseten, and if you're interested in following these talks or my other talks, they are available online at my blog, www.palisuttas.com. You could also purchase my books at www.chronicapress.com. And we do have a YouTube channel now, including videos of these talks are now being uploaded thanks to the visual genius of K.J. Inglewood. And those will be available on the YouTube site as well. And is there anything else? Oh yes, note cards. I do make these talks available in note card. If you would like a note card of the talk, please IM me at the end of the talk, and I'll be happy to provide you with a copy of the note card, which are also being archived in Second Life at the Mount Everest Sim for as long as that exists. So if you go to Mount Everest Sim, you look for the Buddhist College, and then look for the Buddhist Library, which is up the mountain from the college, and then look for the library in the building. There's a desk with a bunch of scrolls on it, and if you click the scrolls, you get the note cards of my talks. So without further ado, let's begin. So this is the Samannaphala Sutta, second sutta of the Digha Nikaya, translated as the fruits of the monastic regimen. The second sutta of the Digha Nikaya is called the Samannaphala Sutta. Contrary to appearances, the root of this title is not samana, a wanderer, at least not directly, but rather samanya, which refers to, that's a ny sound instead of an n sound, which refers to the state of being a monastic. Literally the word means conformity or generality, so in Western parlance we might call that obedience, that is to say obedience to a monastic regimen or structure. According to the Access to Insight website, it refers to an instrument tuned on pitch, from the Pali words sama, meaning even, and anya, meaning reciprocally. And of course this refers to a famous metaphor which the Buddha used, in which he likened meditation to the state of tuning a musical instrument where the strings are not too tight or too loose. The root sam refers to calmness, tranquility, mental quiet, whereas anya has the meaning of knowledge, especially the knowledge of an arhat, anya. In Sanskrit, sama has the meaning of middling, good, and happy, whereas anya has the meaning of extraordinary, and phala means product, fruit, or reward. In this second sutta, the Buddha is staying in the Magadhan capital of Rajagaha. We discussed the Republic of Magadha and Rajagaha in connection with the first sutta. He's staying in the mango grove of Jiwaka Komarabacha, the royal physician, with a large monastic entourage. The king, Ajatasattu Vedeheputta, on the Chakumasya festival, Chatumasya festival, is surrounded by his ministers, yet stricken in heart. The king was a patricide, having murdered his father to gain the throne, yet despite this appalling fact, he had grown contrite. And there is the king there on the slideshow on his elephant, his royal tusker, as the text says. This festival, that is the Chandumasya festival, marks the night of the full moon, the Uposita, of the final month of the 4-month rainy autumn season, or seasons, it's a combined season, which ends in October, the month between mid-October and mid-November. The calendar varies. The Indian calendar is lunisolar, so it varies a bit. But it's generally mid-October to mid-November, which is the month of Kartika. This is when the water lily blooms, hence it is called Komudi, which means literally water lily. And it is sacred to Krishna and the holiest month of the year for Vaishnavites. The evening being fine and clear, the king expressed the desire to visit a holy man, so his ministers listed off the well-known teachers in the area. Of course, the rainy autumn season is a time when traveling is not undertaken because of the monsoons. So this was the very end of the season. The weather is clearing, but the teachers are still all in one place, as it were, because they haven't been traveling. So they're all available, and the teachers are named, which gives us a very interesting insight into the teachers of the Buddha's time and also the kinds of teachings that they were espousing. And the specific teachers referred to are Purana Kassapa, Makali Gosala, Ajita Kesam Kambali, Pakuda Kachayana, Sanja Benlataputta, the agnostic who we met in Sutta number 1, and Naganta Nataputta, the leader of the Jains. But the king showed no interest in visiting any of them. As we discover, the reason is that he has already visited all of them. The royal physician remained silent during all this time, and when the king asked Jivaka why he was silent, Jivaka told the king that Gautama the Buddha was residing with his entourage in Jivaka's own mango grove and invited the king to meet the Buddha, to which proposal the king agreed. Apparently the Buddha was the only one of the 7 that the king had not yet met. So King Ajatasattu assembled his royal household, and he and his harem of wives, and Jivaka presumably, proceeded by elephant to the mango grove. And that is the actual mango grove, not so mango-y or grovey anymore, but that's a contemporary picture of the archaeological site where the mango grove was located. And when the king came near to the grove, it was dark and deathly quiet, and the king suspects a trap, but Jivaka assures him that it's safe. This was, of course, a time, as we know from Ajatasattu's own history, having killed his father. I've discussed this in other talks, that the political situation in the Buddha's time was really quite terrible. And there's a lot of wars and a lot of violence and dangers. So paranoia it was a paranoid society, rather like our own society, in fact, in many ways. When the king came near to the grove, it was dark and deathly quiet, and the king suspects a trap, but Jivaka assures him that it is safe. In the distance, the Buddha can see, the king rather, can see torches inside a round pavilion. So he makes his way there on foot, having gone as far as he can by elephant, to find the Buddha sitting inside against the middle column of the pavilion, called the round pavilion, with many monastics sitting, facing him, all dressed in the simple ochre-stained robes, which was the robes that the Sangha wore. The king had to ask Jowaka which monastic was the Buddha, although the Buddha was sitting against the middle column of the pavilion, perhaps contradicting the notion that the Buddha was so charismatic and handsome that he was unmistakable. Alternatively, the Sutta states that the unlikely figure of 1,250 monastics were present in the round pavilion, so perhaps he was lost in the crowd. As I discussed last time, the Pali Canon invariably inflates numbers and descriptions in order to make things seem more grand than they actually were. As the king approaches the Buddha and stands beside him, the Sutta says, quote, "The order of monks continued in silence like a clear lake," unquote. The king, marveling at the composure of the assembly, compares the calm of the monks unfavorably to his son, Udayyabhadda. And Udayyabhadda would later murder Ajatasattu, so he had reason to be concerned. Interestingly, Udayyabhadda is not present. The Buddha's first words on seeing Ajatasattu were, "Do your thoughts go to the one you love, your majesty?" quote unquote, referring, of course, to the king's son. And in fact, the king confirms that he was thinking about his son as he entered the pavilion. The king prostrates to the Buddha and, turning, makes namaste to the monks and then sits to one side facing the Buddha. Ajatasattu asks the Buddha to justify the homeless life by asking the Buddha if there is any fruit or reward to leading a homeless life, instead of contributing to society through productive work and thereby gaining merit for a favorable rebirth. Somewhat confrontational sort of question. Before answering, the Buddha asks the king to tell him what the other ascetics and Brahmins he has consulted say. So the king tells him. Purana Kassapa has expressed the view that there is no good or evil karma, and therefore neither merit nor demerit, from which he draws the conclusion that, quote, "If with a razor-sharp wheel one were to make of this earth one single mass and heap of flesh, there would be no evil as a result of that," unquote. Today we would call him a nihilist. Macaulay Gosala holds that defilement is the inherent state of man, who has to proceed through a preordained sequence of events in a cosmological scheme extending over 4,800,000 eons, each eon an incalculable interval, and a bewildering diversity of types and classes of beings. When all of this is finished, one achieves final liberation, but there is nothing that can be done to accelerate the process, so yoga is meaningless. Gosala might be called a fatalist. Ajita Kesan Kambali is a materialist who believes that the body disintegrates into the elements at death and that mind dissolves into space and ceases to exist. Pakuda Kachayana has a strange theory of 7 bodies that somehow are indestructible despite the appearance of mortality. They have a relationship with each other, but in themselves cannot be destroyed. Niganta Nataputta, and that's a picture of him there. I've included a picture of him because of his importance as the leader of Jainism at that time, declares that liberation is attainable by servitude. In Jainism, only action counts. In Buddhism, action counts, but only as the expression of intention. This is an essential difference between Jainism and Buddhism. Rather similar, in fact, to the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Thus, intention is the essential karmic factor, according to the Buddha. For Niganta Nataputta, it's all about obedience to rules. Finally, Sanjaya Belataputta, we know, is the agnostic who denies knowing anything from the last sutta. What all of these teachers have in common is that they offer no fruits for the homeless life. Thus, the king's quest was quite literally fruitless. In the next section of the Samannaphala Sutta, we see another side of King Ajatasattu, in addition to being a patricide, namely that of a devout man, for only a devout man would so approve of the going forth as such. The dialogue provides the Buddha with the opportunity to instruct the king, the Sangha, and thus us, in the fruits of the homeless life, illustrated by the use of metaphors. For example, in the first illustration, a slave of the king is delivered from his slavery by joining the Sangha. When the Buddha asks him if the king would demand his reclamation, the king protests that instead he would worship him. These are the words of a devout man. So devout is Ajatasattu that when he departs, the Buddha says to the Sangha, quote, "The king is done for, his fate is sealed, monks. But if the king had not deprived his father, that good man and just king, of his life, then, as he sat here, the pure and spotless Dhamma would have arisen in him," unquote. And here we see an interesting idea, the idea that negative karma can inhibit realization. Not that profound an idea, perhaps, but nonetheless a confirmation of the fundamental axiom of the Dharma. The king is sold with the first fruit of liberation from the state of being a slave and is eager to hear more. The Buddha goes on to cite the following fruits of the homeless life. First, the freedom from servitude, and those references, verse references, paragraph references in the Maurice Walsh-Adish translation of the Samannaphala Sutta. So the first, the fruits in order are, and you will see that there is a sequence here. First, the freedom from servitude. Second, solitude. Third, the joy of detachment, also known as the first jhana. 4, the joy of concentration, also known as the second jhana. 5, joy devoid of delight, the third jhana. 6, mental purity and clarification, the fourth jhana. Culminating in 7, the perfection of insight, which is the culmination, as explained in the text, the culmination of the jhanas. And followed by 8, the production of the mind-made body. 9, what I'm calling psychedelic experiences, for lack of a better term. 10, clairaudience, that is divine hearing. 11, telepathy, I think we all know what that is. 12, recollection of previous lives. 13, the divine eye. There's several eyes in Buddhism, and this is the divine eye, whereby one perceives the karma of others. And finally, 14, perfect mindfulness and full awakening. Following the fruit of solitude, the king asks the Buddha if he can name another fruit of the homeless life. To answer, the Buddha describes the appearance of a Tathagata, who is described as an arhat and a Buddha, fully enlightened, endowed with both wisdom, or dharma, and morality, or conduct, one who follows the path and the worlds, one who follows the path and knows the worlds, trains men who are capable of training, and teaches devas and men. Devas are, of course, as we discussed in the last sutta, the divine beings, higher beings, spiritual beings, or perhaps luminous beings, widely mistranslated in Buddhist translations as gods or deities. It's really not a very appropriate translation. Higher beings that surpass the human and men. This is the stock account of the accomplishments of a Tathagata. He is self-ordained, that is, not ordained by another. This is an essential distinction between a Buddha and an Arhat. Possessed of super knowledge, which we discussed in the last talk, and he proclaims the world with its devas, maras, brahmas, princes, and people, presumably a reference to his understanding of metaphysics, ontology, and cosmology, contrary to the view that the Buddha had no such teaching. The householder, having heard the Tathagata, gains faith in him and resolves to go forth into the homeless life to acquire merit. In this state, he cultivates 4 qualities: morality, or self-discipline, or self-control; guarding the sense doors, which is a psychological quality, clearly; and contentment. Finally, he cultivates mindfulness and clear awareness, and he rejoices and becomes glad, free of the 5 hindrances of sensory desire, hindrances or obstructions, of sensory desire, ill will, sloth and torpor. That's one. Restlessness and worry. That's another. And doubt. Like one freed from debt, sickness, bonds, slavery, or the perils of the desert. And these are all metaphors that the Buddha used in his presentation of the fruits of the homeless life, which you will recognize if you've read today's Sutta. This leads in turn to the realization of the first Sutta, the first jhana rather, which is the third fruit of the homeless life. Thus, the Samannaphala Sutta presents a comprehensive overview of the entire Buddhist path, and for this reason it is widely regarded by multiple authorities as a masterpiece of the Pali Canon. In his description of the path, not just in this sutta, but throughout the Pali Canon, the Buddha, but also in this sutta, the Buddha repeatedly emphasizes the body. Thus he says, quote, "Just as a skilled bathman or his assistant, kneading the soap powder which he has sprinkled with water, forms from it in a metal dish a soft lump, so that the ball of soap powder becomes one oleaginous mass," I love that word, oleaginous mass, "bound with oil so that nothing escapes. So this monk suffuses, drenches, fills, and irradiates his body so that no spot remains untouched." Unquote. This the somewhat sensual character of this description is surprising. The Buddha's emphasis on the body is unmistakable and remarkable. Sarah Shaw, in her anthology of Pali meditation texts, writes, quote, "One of the distinguishing features of the Buddha's system of meditation is the emphasis placed upon the physical body, both as a foundation for practice and the means of experiencing and exploring reality. Because there is also a mixture of painful and happy experience, the human bodily form is considered the most suitable for spiritual development. The suttas of the Pali Canon do not dismiss bodily and sensory experiences as illusion or a delusion, or sensory experience as in itself negative or debilitating. The comprehensiveness of the practice and its applicability to so many diverse areas of life is, I think, also peculiarly Buddhist. Buddhaghosa says that as a meditation subject, it is only taught in the dispensation of a Buddha. Yes, Phoenix Aglow, sensory experience is not negative. That is an interesting observation which she makes, which reminds me of the perspective of Mrs. C.A.F. Rhys-Davids. I don't know if you attended the talk I gave on C.A.F. Rhys-Davids, but she developed a view of Buddhism in which she said that the early Buddhist literature is not nearly as negative in terms of the body than later monastic editors would have us believe. And I'm wondering if when she writes that, there's her name, you'll find the talk I gave on her in my blog. I'm wondering when she writes that, if she's thinking of, she's been influenced by C.A.F. Rhys-Davids' view, in which the Buddha appears as more worldly than the cast that is put upon him by his later editors. Beyond that, I don't have much to comment on that. She's a very as an established Buddhist scholar, so I take her at her word, and it would be nice to get her to elaborate it. Unfortunately, I don't have her handy, so I can't ask her to do that. And Argus Portal asks, okay, because there's a pause, may I ask something too? Yes, you may. And Argus Portal says, referring to the fruits of the homeless life, what is the difference of experience, jhanas, nimittas, and your ninth point psychedelic experiences? I just lost my spot. There, okay. The essential difference between the jhanas and the what I'm calling the supernatural powers, which is actually the expression that the text uses, which I'm calling psychedelic experiences, and I'm going to explain that a little more shortly. The essential difference is that the jhanas are ecstatic illuminations characterized by non-ordinary psychological or psychic states, but not powers or abilities as such. They're more like realizations or illuminations, whereas the so-called supernormal powers or psychic powers are actual visionary, transformative visionary and psychic states. Yes, absolutely. In fact, again, I'm going to discuss this, but Rhys Davids argues, and this is T.W. now, not Mrs. Rhys Davids, but her husband, in the Pali English Dictionary, he argues that, in fact, the jhanas are ecstatic states. Okay, so the conclusion of Sarah Shah's quotation is Buddhaghosa says that as a meditation subject, it is only taught in the dispensation of a Buddha. I will give you that reference as well if you're interested in looking it up. I believe that book is online as a PDF. And Momoko asks, does not the term power imply that one would have a certain amount of control or an ability to manipulate an experience? Absolutely. That is implied. Buddhism definitely affirms the reality of psychic powers understood in exactly that way. Now, the Buddha does say that the development of such powers is not important to enlightenment, and he actually discourages them, their cultivation for their own sake. They are nevertheless of a sign of progress and prominently mentioned throughout the Pali Canon, especially if you'll recall the recollection of past lives, which is a power attributed directly to the Buddha and is considered to be a sign of his enlightenment. Such a distinctive emphasis noted by Buddhaghosa and others, and it was actually, I noticed this by myself initially, this curious emphasis on the body, and then found confirmation, I'm happy to say, in Sarah Shah, so it's not just others have noticed it as well. So such a distinctive emphasis is surely key to comprehending Buddha Dharma, suggestive of a similar emphasis of cognate practices such as Hatha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, Cho, Qigong, etc., and others too, and also in shamanism. Based on a hypothesized psychophysical energy, variously referred to as Kundalini, Tumo, Qi, etc., or Tsi, in the Hindu, Tibetan, and Chinese traditions, respectively. Actually, it's pronounced Tsi, not Qi, as commonly pronounced. Thus, there is something singularly significant about the body in the context of spiritual development in the Buddhist worldview. And this is something to keep in mind as we progress through the suttas. And you will see it manifest from time to time in different ways. The second fruit had answered the king's question, but the Buddha continues to elaborate 12 more fruits of the homeless life. The first 2 pertain to the outer or bodily life. The next 5, numbers 3 to 7, perhaps I'll just go back, see if I can find them. There they are. The next 5, 3 to 7, pertain to the cultivation of the mind and the path of meditation based on the jhanas. Jhana is another of those words for which no completely satisfactory translation exists. It comes from Sanskrit dhyana, root D-H-I, meaning to shine or to perceive. The Pali English Dictionary says it never means, quote, it never means vaguely meditation. It is the technical term for a special religious experience reached in a certain order of mental states. The Pali English Dictionary goes on to itemize these states, quoting, 1. The mystic, with his mind free from sensuous and worldly ideas, concentrates his thoughts on some special subject, for instance, the impermanence of things, of all things. This he thinks out by attention to the facts and by reasoning. So we would call that, we might call that, based in certain traditions, that is called vipassana meditation. 2, then uplifted above attention and reasoning, he experiences joy and ease, both of body and mind. 3, then the bliss passes away and he becomes suffused with a sense of ease. And 4, he becomes aware of pure lucidity of mind and equanimity of heart. Continuing the quotation, the whole really forms one series of mental states. The state of mind left after the experience of the 4 jhanas is described as follows, and this is a quote, now quote within a quote. Within his heart, thus serene, made pure, translucent, cultured, void of evil, supple, ready to act, firm, and imperturbable, unquote. Still quoting Rhys Davids, it will be seen that there is no suggestion of trance, but rather of an enhanced vitality. In the description of the crises in the religious experiences of the Christian saints and mystics, expressions similar to those used in the jhanas are frequent. Laymen could pass through the 4 jhanas, and the jhanas are only a means, not an end. End quote. The 7th fruit, perfection of insight, is the imperturbable perfection of metaphysical understanding stemming from complete freedom from all impurities and hindrances to true seeing. This is a transitional element to the next group of 6, number 8 to 13. And obviously I've got my numbering off a little bit. Oh no, that's correct. Number 8 to 13, pardon me, which can only be referred to as magical, including clairaudience, telepathy, and recalling previous lives, and the divine eye. The psychic powers, so-called, including multi-corporeality, invisibility, the ability to pass through matter, levitation, and traveling in a mental body, which, of course, you can see referred to in number 8, also the production of a mind-made body, is, as well as what can only be described as cosmological or astronomical visions, are very suggestive of psychedelic experiences. And this is the item which I've, in number 9, which I've called psychedelic experiences, which the text calls supernormal powers or supernatural powers, something like that. And interestingly, these are also typical characteristics of the UFO phenomenon, which I refer to from time to time in these talks. The essence of the divine eye may be interpreted as the intense realization of the truth of karma, whereby one actually perceives and experiences it as real, thus an aspect of right view. But it might also be taken as a psychic power in which one perceives the karmas of others. It is also transitional, leading to the final and singular fruit, the attainment of a Tathagata, awakening itself, what the literature inaccurately refers to as enlightenment. This last item is uniquely Buddhist. This list of fruits is therefore an alternative 12-fold model, if you like, of the path of the monastic life, leading from ordination and to the attainment of a Tathagata. I'd now like to consider the image used by the Buddha in connection with the 3rd jhana, joy devoid of delight or happiness, that is the 5th fruit of the homeless life. The Buddha says, quote, just as if in a pond of blue, red, or white lotuses, in which the flowers, born in the water, grown in the water, not growing out of the water, are fed from the water's depths, those blue, red, or white lotuses would be suffused with the cool water. Again, there's that word suffuse, which was used previously with reference to the sensation in the body of the jhanas. Suffused with the cool water, so with this joy devoid of delight, the monk so suffuses his body that no spot remains untouched. Unquote. Say what? What's this about lotuses? The lotus is one of the 8 auspicious symbols of Buddhism. The BuddhaNet website says, quote, lotuses are symbols of purity and spontaneous generation and hence symbolize divine birth. According to the Lalita Vistara, quote, this is a quote within a quote, "The spirit of the best of men is spotless, like the new lotus in the muddy water which does not adhere to it," unquote. And continuing the quotation, the outer quotation, and according to esoteric Buddhism, the heart of the beings is like an unopened lotus. When the virtues of the Buddha develop therein, the lotus blossoms. This is why the Buddha sits on a lotus in bloom, and in Tantrism it is the symbol of the feminine principle, unquote. And those of you who are familiar with the story of Padmasambhava, of course, will also remember that Padmasambhava is reputedly born as an 8-year-old child on a lotus. In terms of the significance of the lotus symbol, you will also recall what I pointed out at the beginning of this talk, that the occasion of this talk was the night of Komudi, which means water lily or lotus, and this was an oppositor full moon day of that name because the water lily blooms during that high holy month. So there is the coincidence of the lotus symbol and the timing of the chakra, or of the Sutta rather, which I would like to call attention to. The lotus is also the name of the highest chakra, the Sahasrara, or lotus chakra, situated or above the crown of the head. It's associated with the state of pure consciousness. Although the chakras were not elaborated systematically until the 8th century of the Common Era, breath channels or nadis had already been discussed in the classical Upanishads. And the interpretation I'm making is a very Dharma-based interpretation. It's not an historicist interpretation, but I think it works in connection with the remarkable image which the Buddha presents in the Sutta. All of the chakras are also referred to as lotuses. It is also the name of the posture of perfect spiritual equilibrium in yoga. In the chakra system, the third jhana corresponds to the Ajna chakra, corresponding to the white Om, seed syllable, in the Guru Yoga of Padmasambhava. Those of you who are familiar with Nandro will recall the white, red, and blue light rays which emanate from the forehead, throat, and heart of the Guru in the Guru Yoga practice of Nyandro. This is the location of the pineal gland, linked to the brain's production of dimethyltryptamine, our own natural psychedelic. The Buddha makes a point of emphasizing 3 distinct colors of lotus, and the fact that the flowers appear on the surface of the water, neither above nor below, that they are fed from the depths, and that the joy devoid of delight is experienced in and suffuses the body with positive feeling detached even from its own delight. These colors recur in the rays of light that emanate from the forehead, the Ajna chakra, the throat, the Vishuddha chakra, and the heart, the Anahata chakra, of the Absolute Guru. The top 3 chakras, white, red, and blue respectively, corresponding to the seed syllables Om, Ah, and Hung, corresponding to body, speech, and mind. Studies have shown that plant growth is maximized under the influence of just this combination of lights, which is called RBW, or RBW light. And if any of you have ever been involved in a grow-up, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. The seed or root of the lotus is the mud of samsara, a remarkable fact that the lotus is a symbol of enlightenment itself. And this is an aspect of the lotus that hasn't been remarked upon very prominently. So I am going to remark upon it here. This indicates the possibility of an unconfirmed function for samsara within the scheme of reality, something which we're going to watch for in subsequent suttas, since that is the open question in all of Buddhism. What is the role or function of samsara? Does it even have a role or function? Since reality is all and includes all, it must also include samsara. Even if samsara is illusory, it is still experienced. Therefore, it must be part of the scheme. The root of the lotus binds us to samsara, but it is also the source of enlightenment itself, and it must be drawn on before it can be cut. Nevertheless, the lotus does not rise above the level of the water. It is the meeting point of the two realities represented by water and sun. In this respect, the lotus is more like the bodhisattva than the arhat. If the lotus is the crown of the head, then the lotus itself is mind, and the root of the lotus is the spine. So, to summarize, King Ajatasattu, a worldling and a patricide, challenges the Buddha to demonstrate the practical value of the monastic life compared to the social contribution of householders, yet the king is also represented as a devout man who demands little to be convinced of the value of homelessness. The question is important to the king, who has asked it of at least 6 other teachers prior to the Buddha. To us, he appears as the classic neurotic, afflicted by a bad conscience, vicious yet sentimentally religious. Against this backdrop, the religious teachers of the Buddha's time have little to offer Ajatasattu, whose interest in karma may be related to the karmic punishment for his own crime, which he confesses to the Buddha in the presence of the Sangha. When the king comes upon the Sangha, his overwhelming impression is peace, so different from the agitation and violence of his own family, including Ajatasattu and his son Udayabhadra. Thus the king has already answered his own question without realizing it, as is often the case with questions. The Buddha answers the king's question by showing him the opportunity the monastic life provides to the householder to get free of social restrictions. But he also uses it as an opportunity to segue into a description of the spiritual path, articulating 14 fruits of the monastic regimen, including the 4 jhanas, or ecstatic illuminations, 6 psychic powers, and the culminating realization of a Tathagata that is identical with complete awakening and liberation. The path thus laid out starts with faith, followed by physical and mental isolation, morality, vinaya, self-control and self-discipline, and meditation. We then segue into a discussion of the special Buddhist character of mindfulness of the body, recognizing that other traditions are also rooted in a concept that emphasizes the centrality of the body in spiritual development based on the Kundalini, Tummo, and Tsi concepts. We also noted the similarity between psychedelic experience and some of the so-called psychic powers, which are also typical characteristics of the UFO phenomenon. Finally, we concluded with a consideration of the Buddhist lotus symbol, one of the 8 auspicious symbols, which was introduced as an image in connection with the 3rd jhana and the 5th fruit. The significance of the lotus as a symbol of the relationship between samsara and nirvana was examined, as well as the correspondence between the blue, red, and white lotuses and the same number and color of light rays that emanate from the head of the absolute guru in a guru yoga, which is a part of the Tibetan practice of Nyandro, representing the perfection of body, speech, and mind by the mantra Om Hum, and asking the open-ended question, what is the soteriological function of samsara? That's not a question we can answer, of course, based on this sutta, but it's something we've asked, and we'll keep it in mind as we progress through the Pali Canon. So that completes my talk for today. Does anyone have any questions or discussion they would like to have before we proceed to the dedication of merit? I see a statement. Phoenix Aglow says, thank you for teaching us TT. I'm always impressed with the variety of the views that you cover. Here you are discussing the monastic path, yet managed to discuss the importance of the mud of the lotus, etc. Yes, that's... I'm interested in the implications of all of these statements and symbols considered axiomatically, and not just limiting oneself to these axioms, but also exploring the implications of the axioms and everything in context through the totality. So hopefully by the time we finish these 34 suttas of the Pali Canon, we'll be able to have a grand summary in which we will have a better and clearer understanding of what Buddha Dharma actually says, which is my objective. And sometimes there are contradictions between the different portions of the Pali Canon which need to be examined in order to be resolved. The obvious one being one obvious one being the contradictory views of women in the Pali Canon, which I recur to from time to time and have discussed in my talk on women in ancient India and the Pali tradition, the status of women in ancient India and the Pali tradition. And there are others as well. Lightleaf asks, is this a sutra when that kind they set him a trap since all monks were quiet? I think you're asking me if this is perhaps you came in late, and you're asking me if that is that sutta, and it is, in fact, that sutta. At the beginning, I talk about how when King Ajatasattu travels to the mango grove to see the Buddha on his elephants with his wives, he's freaked out, as it were, by the quiet and of the place, and thinks that enemies may be lying, and he may be being led into a trap by the royal physician Jivaka, because that's just the sort of king he was, and he became alarmed that he might be led into a trap, but in fact he was not. Lightleaf asks, I'm sorry, that's the same question. Oh, you repeated it. Is this a sutra when that king thought they set him a trap since all monks are quiet? Yes. So yes, that's the sutta. Any other questions or discussion before we proceed to the dedication of merit? That is the actual mango grove, incidentally. The archaeological remnants of it. I see a yes, meaning presumably there's a question, but I'm not seeing a question. Any more questions or discussion? Lightleaf says, by the way, if you open the chakras, it's wise not to think you actually advanced on the path. It's possible to think one is more advanced than one is, no matter what spiritual experience one has had. So that's true of chakras, it's true of jhanas, it's true of anything, really. There's always a spiritual experience beyond that which you've experienced. Phoenix Aglow asks, does this not imply that the basic nature of human beings is as pure as that of the Buddhas? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by the word this, but that is, of course, the fundamental doctrine of Buddha nature, or Buddha potential, the Tathagata Garbha, that human nature is essentially Buddha-like. Prosper Telling says, if that was a mango grove, it is now a testament to impermanence. It is indeed. A lot of the Buddhist sites, if you look at pictures of the Buddhist sites in India, there's not much rainforest. Whereas if you read the texts, the impression you get is of a place overrun by rainforest with precarious, difficult, and dangerous roads, really tracks connecting various centers, varying from villages to small cities. Some of the cities had 100,000 people in them, so they weren't small. Anything else? Lightleaf asks, do you know how much hours Buddha slept? There's a text in the Pali Canon somewhere that implies that the monks and presumably the Buddha followed a regimen comparable to the monks. Slept 4 hours a night. The impression one gets when one reads the descriptions is that the Buddha and the monks got up before sunrise. One also gets the impression that the Buddha was an insomniac and was somewhat frequently awake over at least for part of the night. And he also had the monks meditated after they went on alms round in the early morning, had their meal of the day around 10 a.m. I believe, and then they meditated in the afternoon. The Buddha napped in the afternoon, for which he was criticized, in addition to the 4 hours overnight, plus the meditation. Of course, 4 hours is of course, by modern standards, sleep deprivation. I think the threshold is 6. Anything less than 6, 5 or 6 is considered sleep deprivation. But of course, no, meditation is not sleep, but it also generates many of the benefits of sleep. So meditating on top of sleeping 4 hours a night may be the difference between sleep deprivation and no sleep deprivation. Of course, sleep deprivation is also a technique of spiritual development and is attested in the shamanic literature, for example. I compiled a list of 35 techniques from shamanism, which I believe are the essential techniques of spiritual practice, and sleep deprivation is one of those techniques. And the great Korean master, who was acclaimed a second Buddha, is reputed to have not slept for 8 years while sitting continuously in a small box. So sleep deprivation does seem to be one of the techniques that was used within the Sangha. Prosper Telling says, some critics have called it a form of sleep. Not sure how that is a criticism really, though. Yes, meditation is not sleep as such, but it does generate many of the benefits of sleep, just as napping generates many of the benefits of meditation. And napping is quite different from sleep, although it is sleep. But it's quite different from 8 hours sleep. And the Buddha was a napper as well. I have a book on napping. He's actually listed as a famous napper, which is correct. It's in the Pali Canon. Amma says, wow, can you send me about this shaman techniques, please? If you go to my blog at www.palisuttas.com and you search for shamanism, you should find it. If you can't find it, feel free to email me. You can IM me in Second Life, or you can email me at dollarability@gmail.com, and I'll find the specific article. I refer to it in a couple of different blogs. So if you type for the word shamanism, you'll probably find it in there's probably 2 or 3 references to it, as well as Carlos Castaneda is entertaining. I've proven charlatan, so I wouldn't try to follow his spiritual path, but he's entertaining and interesting. Sort of in the same category as Lobsang Rampa, I think. Just a reminder to people, I've started to get requests. If you would like a copy of the note card of this talk, to send me an IM at the end of the talk, and I will be happy to provide you with the note card, which will be fairly quick because I actually have made the note card. So, any more? We're 6 minutes to go. We can talk a few more minutes if you wish, or we can conclude with the dedication of merit. So I'll give you a minute. If there are any more questions, Otherwise, we'll proceed with the dedication of merit. By the way, that image is the Benison Buddha with luminous, silvery luminous light emanating from his body. I couldn't find I could find the Ong Ah Hung mantra in the colors, white, red, and blue, in a vertical hierarchy or pillar, corresponding, of course, to the chakras. But I couldn't find the full visualization that I was trying to find the complete visualization that's used in Nandro, with the rays emanating from the head of the guru into and penetrating the corresponding chakras of the yogi, but I couldn't find an image of that. Light Leaf says, it's fascinating how mostly everyone in contact with the Buddha became enlightened. That's not quite true. There certainly was a significant group of people who were close to the Buddha, both householders and monastics, which gives the lie to the idea that the fundamental social distinction in Buddhism was between monastics and householders, as it is today. Peter Macefield has discussed this in his book Divine Revelation in the Pali Canon, and he says that the actual original social distinction was between the Puthajjana and the Aryas. And you could have Puthajjana and you could have Aryans, which are both in the leading householder life and the monastic life. So you have Arya Sangha, you have the Puthajjana Sangha, you have Aryans, Arya Puthajjanans, Aryan householders, and Puthajjana householders. My point being that it wasn't just monastics who were enlightened as a result of their close association with the Buddha. There were also a significant number of householders that were enlightened as well. So the notion that the monasticism is a ticket to enlightenment is actually a distortion of Dharma. The notion that that everyone became enlightened is also not true. There was an extended Puthajjana Sangha, people who were hanging on. Keep in mind, this was not a centralized organization. This was a highly decentralized organization. Initially, the Buddha ordained monastics, but once the Sangha became too large, the monastics ordained each other and were teachers to each other. And there were many members of the Buddha Sangha who had never met the Buddha or any of the higher-ranking monastics. So it became a very popular movement during the Buddha's time, very decentralized, very extended, and there were a lot of Puthajjana monastics, a lot of monastics who were a little bit crazy, were opportunists who were looking for handouts, and whole variety of reasons that you can imagine, both legitimate and illegitimate, that people might have to join an organization like the Sangha. In a time of great difficulty, a time of great danger, violence, and difficulty. And the Sangha was looked up to, so you got an immediate reputation boost if you became a member of the Sangha. It was widely well regarded, not universally so. There were people and places that did not admire the Sangha, but there were many who did. Not just the Sangha, but also wandering holy men in general were very, in the 5th and 6th century before the Common Era, were very well respected. As you can see from this sutta, when King Ajatasattu says how much he would respect a servant of his, just because he became a wandering recluse, and he would revere him for that, and not demand that he return to his service. That in itself shows how widely regarded the samanas were. K.J. Inglewood says, those are probably just the people who became part of the narrative. Well, there were, again, you don't want to bias it the other way, there were a significant group of people close to the Buddha who did achieve arahantship as well. Lightleaf says Arya Sangha means noble Sangha with at least 4 people with first stage of enlightenment and above. Okay. First stage of enlightenment, of course, is stream winners. And being a stream winner is itself a high state, and would certainly qualify one as an Arya. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Let's proceed with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Before I do that, we'll just answer that question. I'll stick around a little bit afterwards if people want to ask anything else. Lightleaf asks, stream winning is what makes one noble, right? Yes. The right view, which is the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path, which really means perfect view, as Alex Berzin has pointed out on his very excellent website, alexberzin.org, I believe it is even the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path is an advanced attainment. And it is right view that makes one a stream winner, which means that one will inevitably achieve enlightenment, that is to say arhantship, within 7 rebirths. And it is considered the first stage of Aryanhood. Okay, so let's do the dedication of merit. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity to discuss Dhamma. I will post the name of the sutta that we'll be discussing next Saturday, which will be, of course, the 3rd sutta of the Digha Nikaya. I'll post that on the Dharma transmission to the West group. So if you are interested in following this series of talks on the suttas of Digha Nikaya, I do recommend that you join my Dharma transmission to the West group, and I'll post relevant information to that group concerning the nature of the next week's talk, in case you're interested in reading ahead and reading the sutta that we're going to be discussing. So again, thank you very much, and namaskar.